3 years ago, my world changed forever. My husband, Harold, the love of my life, and my partner in building a business empire, passed away. We'd spent 2 decades turning a small consulting firm into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, amassing a fortune most people could only dream of. But when Harold died, I was left with more than money. I was left with a question. Who in my life loved me for me, and who loved me for what I could give them? So I made a choice, a radical one. I stepped back from the spotlight of wealth and power. I traded my designer dresses for thrift store cardigans, my penthouse for a modest one-bedroom apartment in Sacramento, and my sleek BMW for a 6-block walk to my son's house. I became the grieving widow, the struggling mother-in-law, the woman who seemed to need her son's occasional charity. It was a costume, meticulously crafted to reveal the truth about the people around me. My son, Darren, was 34, handsome and kind-hearted, with his father's dark eyes and gentle nature. But over the years, I'd watched him change, his warmth dimming under the influence of his wife, Talia. At 29, Thalia was a vision. Platinum blonde hair, a wardrobe that screamed money, and a smile that could charm or cut depending on her mood. She had a way of dominating a room, of making you feel small if you didn't fit her vision of perfection. And I, in my faded cardigans and simple bun, was the furthest thing from her idea of presentable. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday morning. Darren's voice was strained over the phone, the way it always was when Talia was nearby. "Mom, would you like to come over for dinner Friday night? Thalia's making her famous lasagna." Famous? I nearly laughed. Thalia's cooking was a disaster. Oversalted, undercooked, a culinary crime scene. But I'd learned to bite my tongue. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. What time?" 7:30. And, Mom... He paused, and I could hear Talia's sharp whisper in the background. "Maybe dress a little nicer this time. You know how Talia likes things to look. Presentable." Presentable. The word stung, not because I cared about Thalia's opinion, but because it came from my son. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, gray hair pulled back, no makeup, the same worn cardigan I'd worn to their house a dozen times. For 3 years, this had been my uniform, my shield. It was a deliberate choice, a test to see who would look past the facade and see me. Friday evening arrived with an October chill that cut through my thin coat as I walked the 6 blocks to their house. The house itself was a gift I'd given them 7 years ago as a wedding present, though they didn't know it. I'd funneled the purchase through a property management company, letting them believe Darren's marketing job covered the mortgage. It was one of many secrets I kept, waiting for the right moment to reveal. Darren opened the door with a forced smile, his hug quick and perfunctory. "Hi, Mom. Come in." At 34, he was still my boy, but there was a hollowness in his eyes that hadn't been there before Talia. Thalia herself appeared in the dining room doorway, her dress probably costing more than most people's rent, her expression one of barely concealed disdain. "Eileen," she said, her voice sharp as ever. "Thank you for having me," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The dining room was set with their best china, except for my place. My plate was older, mismatched, the glass chipped, the fork slightly bent. Small details, but they spoke volumes about how I was seen in this house. An inconvenience, a burden, someone who didn't belong at the main table. I sat at the far end of the table, as instructed, folding my hands in my lap as Talia served her lasagna with theatrical flourishes. "I hope you like it," she said, her tone suggesting she couldn't care less. It's my grandmother's recipe. I took a bite. It was as bad as I'd expected. Soggy noodles, too much salt, a faint burn from an oven left too long. It's delicious, I lied, smiling. The conversation limped along. Darren talked about his job at the marketing firm, carefully avoiding the promotion he'd been passed over for yet again. Thalia dominated, as always, prattling about her yoga classes, her shopping sprees, her plans to redecorate. "We're thinking of getting new furniture," she announced, slicing her lasagna into perfect little squares. "Something modern. The stuff we have now is so outdated." I remembered choosing that furniture with them when they moved in. Thalia had loved it then, gushing about its elegance. But now, like everything else in her life, including me, it was no longer good enough. "That sounds expensive," I said mildly. Her eyes flashed. "Well, some people prioritize making their homes beautiful. Some people understand you have to invest in quality." The barb was clear. I was neither beautiful nor quality, a thrift store relic in her pristine world. I took another bite of the awful lasagna and said nothing. Then Darren spoke, his voice hesitant. "Actually, Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something." I set down my fork, sensing the shift in the air. Talia leaned forward, her face a mask of false concern. "Eileen, we've been worried about you. Living alone in that tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet. It's been 3 years since Harold passed, and you're still not getting back on your feet." "I'm managing fine," I said quietly. "Are you, though?" Talia's tone turned patronizing, the kind she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while delivering a blow. "You can barely afford your rent. You shop at thrift stores. You don't even have a car anymore." All true from her perspective. What she didn't know was that every choice was deliberate. The apartment was paid for in cash. The thrift store clothes were a costume. The lack of a car was because I preferred to walk, not because I couldn't afford one. "I get by," I replied. "Getting by isn't living, Mom," Darren said, and for a moment, I heard genuine concern in his voice. It gave me hope that my son, the real Darren, was still in there, buried under Thalia's influence. But then she took over again. "The thing is, Eileen, we can't keep helping you forever. Darren works hard for his money, and we have our own future to think about. We want to start a family soon, and we need to be practical." I looked at Darren, waiting for him to correct her, to point out that their help amounted to occasional dinners and a birthday card. He said nothing. Talia pressed on, emboldened by his silence. "What we're trying to say is, maybe it's time you thought about getting a job. You're only 64. Lots of people your age work. Walmart is always hiring greeters." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Walmart greeter. After 2 decades of running a multi-million-dollar business with Harold, after building a fortune that could buy their entire neighborhood, she wanted me to stand at a store entrance, smiling for minimum wage. "A job?" I repeated slowly, my voice steady but cold. "Yes," Talia said, her eyes gleaming as if she'd just solved world hunger. "Something to give you purpose, you know. Independence. Self-respect." Self-respect. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but something calmer, more dangerous. A resolve that had been simmering for 3 years. "Is that what you think I am?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dependent?" Talia glanced at Darren, seeking his support. "Well, I mean, let's be honest. You rely on us for everything. Every time there's a bill you can't pay, every time something breaks in your apartment. Who do you call?" The answer was no one. I hadn't asked them for a dime since Harold's funeral, but in Thalia's mind, my existence was a burden. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her, and for the first time in 3 years, I let her see a glimpse of the real me, not the frail widow, but the woman who'd built an empire. Thalia, I said, my voice low and deliberate, you have no idea what's coming for you. The silence was deafening. Darren shifted uncomfortably. Talia's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. Excuse me, she finally managed. I stood, my movements slow and controlled. Thank you for dinner. The lasagna was exactly what I expected. I walked to the front door, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. Behind me, I heard Talia whisper sharply to Darren, "Did she just threaten me?" At the door, I turned back. They were both staring at me from the dining room doorway. Darren confused, Thalia rattled. "Oh, and Thalia," I said, my hand on the knob, "about that job advice, you might want to start updating your own resume." I stepped into the cold night, the door clicking shut behind me, and felt the weight of 3 years begin to lift. The game was over. The truth was coming. 3 days later, Darren called. I'd been expecting it. Thalia wouldn't have let him rest until he demanded answers about my cryptic words at dinner. I was in my small apartment, not my real home, but the one I'd used as a stage for this charade, sipping coffee by the window when the phone rang. "Mom," Darren said, his voice cautious, as if he were speaking to someone unstable. Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like to come over?" There was a pause. In 3 years, Darren had never visited my apartment. He'd offered once to help me move in, but I'd declined. Talia always had an excuse to keep him away. Now, faced with seeing how his mother supposedly lived, he hesitated. Yes, okay. I'll be there in an hour." I spent the next hour preparing for the most important conversation we'd had in years. I brewed his favorite coffee, the expensive kind I kept hidden in the back of my cupboard. I tucked away the financial documents I'd been reviewing. I swapped my thrift store cardigan for something slightly nicer, though still modest, maintaining the illusion for now. When Darren arrived, he looked around the apartment with pity. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, furniture that looked salvaged from yard sales. Some of it was by design. "Mom, this place is—" He struggled for words. "Small?" I suggested. I was going to say depressing. I poured him coffee in one of my good cups, a subtle luxury I kept hidden. He took a sip and looked surprised. "This is really good coffee." "I splurge occasionally," I said with a small smile. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, the silence heavy between us. Finally, Darren cleared his throat. "About Friday night, Thalia's really upset. She thinks you threatened her." "What do you think?" I asked, meeting his eyes. He shifted uncomfortably. "I think something's going on with you that I don't understand. You've been different lately, distant. And then Friday, the way you looked at Talia, the things you said." "The things I said were true," I replied. "What does that mean, Mom? You told her she has no idea what's coming for her. That sounds like a threat." I took a sip of my coffee, choosing my words carefully. The time for full honesty wasn't here yet, but I could offer a glimpse. "Darren, do you remember what your father used to say about people who mistake kindness for weakness?" "He said they learned the difference eventually," he replied, his voice a bit soft. "Exactly." I set down my cup. "For 3 years, I've been kind, patient. I've watched your wife treat me like a burden, an embarrassment, a problem to be solved. I've listened to her lecture me about how I should live, what I should wear, what I should eat. Darren looked uneasy. She's just trying to help. Is she? Or is she trying to make me disappear in the most socially acceptable way possible? I leaned forward. When was the last time Natalia asked how I was doing? Not about my finances, not about bills, but how I was doing as a person. When was the last time she treated me like a human being instead of an inconvenience? He opened his mouth, then closed it, staring into his coffee cup. The silence stretched between us, heavy with truth. Finally, he looked up. So what are you saying? That you're going to cut us out of your life? I'm saying that some people are about to learn that actions have consequences. That still sounds like a threat, he said. I stood and walked to the small bookshelf in my living room. Behind a row of paperback novels was a manila folder, one I'd kept hidden for 3 years. I returned to the table and opened it. Darren, there's something I need to tell you about your mother. His eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, account balances in the millions, deeds for houses, commercial buildings, land across 3 states. Mom, what is this? This is who I really am, I said, watching his face. Your father and I were very successful, more successful than we ever let on. When he died, I inherited everything. I'm worth approximately $5 million. He stared at me, stunned. But you live here. In this apartment, you shop at thrift stores. You don't even have a car. By choice, I said, because I needed to know who would love me when they thought I had nothing. The words hit him like a blow. I watched realization dawn in his eyes, saw him grapple with what the last 3 years had been about. You've been testing us, he whispered. I've been protecting myself, I corrected, from people like your wife. His hands shook as he set down his coffee cup. Mom, this is insane. You let us think you were struggling. You let Thalia think. I let Thalia show me exactly who she is, I said calmly, and she did, repeatedly, for 3 years. But I'm your son. Yes, you are. And I needed to know if you were still my son, or if you'd become someone else entirely. He flinched, my words cutting deep. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without Talia insisting on it? When was the last time you stood up for me when she was cruel? Each question landed like a blade, and I saw them find their mark. I didn't realize she was that bad, he said, his voice breaking. Or you chose not to see it, because it was easier. We sat in silence, the weight of my words settling between us. Finally, Darren spoke, his voice barely audible. What happens now? I leaned back, studying my son, the boy who'd once brought me wildflowers, who'd called me the prettiest mommy in the world, now a man who'd let his wife humiliate his mother. Now, I said softly, we find out if it's too late for you to remember who you used to be. And Talia, she's about to discover that some people aren't as helpless as they appear. Mom, what are you planning? Justice, I said simply. Long overdue justice. I gave them a week to process what I'd told Darren. A week for him to look at his wife with new eyes, to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. A week for Talia to stew over my words at that dinner table. The call came on a Wednesday morning, shattering the quiet of my apartment. Eileen, we need to talk right now. Thalia's voice was sharp, demanding, dripping with entitlement. Good morning to you too, Thalia, I said, settling into my favorite chair with my coffee. Don't play games with me. Darren told me about your little revelation, about the money. I smiled. Did he? Yes, he did, and I want to know what kind of sick game you've been playing. What kind of game do you think I've been playing? I asked, keeping my tone even. Her voice rose, frantic. You let us think you were poor. You sat there and let me worry about you, let me try to help you, and all this time you were secretly rich. Let her worry about me. Let her try to help. The revisionist history was almost laughable. I see toi, I said, and how exactly did you help me, dear? We invited you to dinner. We included you in family events. You mean the dinners where you served me on mismatched plates and lectured me about getting a job at Walmart? Silence. Then with a hiss. You're coming over tonight. We're settling this. 7 o'clock. You owe us an explanation. The line went dead. I finished my coffee, thinking about the confrontation ahead. Then I walked to my bedroom closet and pushed aside the thrift store cardigans. In the back, wrapped in protective garment bags, hung the clothes I used to wear, the ones that reflected who I really was. I chose a black dress, elegant but understated, paired with real jewelry and shoes that cost more than Thalia's monthly grocery bill. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who could buy and sell everything Thalia owned without a second thought. It was time to stop hiding. I arrived at their house at exactly 7 o'clock, the house I'd bought for them 7 years ago, its mortgage quietly paid through a management company. Darren answered the door, his eyes widening. Mom, you look different. Like yourself. Like you used to look when Dad was alive. Talia appeared behind him, her designer outfit screaming money. But next to the quiet confidence of real wealth, she looked like a child playing dress-up. Well, well, she sneered, looking me up and down. The poor widow has quite the wardrobe hidden away. Among other things, I replied, my voice calm but edged with steel. We moved to the living room, the same one I had helped furnish when they moved in. I sat on the sofa I had chosen, in the house I owned, surrounded by the life I had made possible. Thalia stood like a prosecutor ready to deliver her verdict. Okay, let's hear it. The whole truth. What would you like to know? I asked, folding my hands in my lap. Everything. How much money do you have? Why did you lie to us? What kind of person pretends to be poor for 3 years? The kind of person who wants to know who her real friends are, I said. Friends? Talia's laugh was sharp, brittle. I'm your daughter-in-law, not your friend. Family doesn't lie to family. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you told the neighbors I was becoming senile, I said, my voice steady. Why you told Mrs. Henderson I was showing signs of dementia. Why you suggested to the mailman I might need a care facility. Talia's face went pale. Darren turned to her, stunned. Thalia, is that true? I was concerned, she snapped, her eyes blazing. You were acting strange, dressing like a bag lady. I thought you were losing it. Or, I said softly, as you were laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent so you could access what you thought was Harold's life insurance money. The accusation hung in the air like a guillotine. Thalia's mouth opened, then closed. That's insane, she managed. Why would I do that? I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Because 3 months ago, you contacted an elder law attorney. You inquired about obtaining guardianship over an elderly relative showing signs of mental decline. Darren shot to his feet. What? I opened the envelope, revealing emails, phone records, consultations notes. You wanted to know how quickly the process could be completed, whether it could be expedited if the relative had significant assets. How did you get those? Talia's voice was barely audible. Money opens many doors, dear, I said, including the ones you thought were locked. Darren stared at his oim, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. Thalia, please tell me this isn't true. It's not what it looks like, she said, desperation creeping in. I was worried about her. Funny thing, I continued, the attorney's notes show you were particularly interested in accessing bank accounts and liquidating assets for the patient's own good. Talia sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Darren's voice was hollow. Mom, please tell me you're making this up. I'm afraid not, sweetheart, I said. But why would she do this? I looked at Talia, who was staring at the floor, and felt a flicker of pity she didn't deserve. Because she never loved you, Darren. She loved what she thought you could provide. And when your salary wasn't enough for her lifestyle, she looked for other sources of income. That's not true, Talia whispered. Isn't it? I pulled out another set of documents. Then explain the $43,000 in credit card debt you've been hiding from your husband. The shopping sprees financed with cash advances. The jewelry you've pawned and replaced with fakes. Darren's face went white. What? Talia looked up, her face streaked with tears, not of remorse, but of rage. You vindictive, manipulative. I didn't set you up, dear, I interrupted. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. She stood, swaying. You think you've won. You wanted to destroy my marriage, and you did it. Congratulations. I rose, the small apartment version of me gone. In her place stood the woman who'd built an empire, who'd made million-dollar decisions without flinching. I didn't destroy your marriage, Talia. You did. The moment you decided my son was a stepping stone to something better. I love Darren. You love what he represents. Security, status, a meal ticket. But you've never loved him. I stepped closer, forcing her to meet my eyes. You want to know what's really going to happen here, Talia? You're going to pack your things and leave this house tonight. She laughed, wild and high. You can't make me leave my own home. Actually, I can. I pulled out one final document, the deed to the house, my name clearly listed as the owner. This house belongs to me. It always has. You and Darren have been my guests for 7 years. The silence was deafening. Darren stared at the deed, his world unraveling. Talia shook, fury and fear warring in her expression. You can't do this. I have rights, tenant rights. You're not a tenant, I said. You're a guest who's overstayed her welcome. You have 30 minutes, Talia. After that, I call the police for trespassing. Darren, she screamed, turning to him. Say something. This is our home. But Darren looked at her with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. Get out, he said quietly. Get out of my mother's house. Talia's face crumpled, but I felt no satisfaction in her tears, only relief that the charade was over. This isn't over, she hissed at me. You think you've won, but it's not over. I smiled, letting her see how little her threats meant. Oh, but it is, dear. This is just the beginning of what happens to people who mistake my kindness for weakness. She fled upstairs, her footsteps pounding, drawers slamming, sobs of rage echoing through the house. Darren and I stood in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his marriage and the truth I'd spent 3 years uncovering. Mom, he said finally, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I know you are, sweetheart, I said. What happens now? I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Now we find out if it's possible to rebuild what we lost. The calls started the next morning. First, my sister-in-law, Margaret, Harold's brother's wife. her voice dripping with disapproval. Eileen, what in God's name has gotten into you? Talia called me crying last night. She says you threw her out of her own home. I sipped coffee from a chipped mug, maintaining the charade for now. Did she mention why? She said you've been lying about money, pretending to be poor when you're wealthy. That's disturbed behavior, Eileen. Is it? I asked mildly. Did she mention the attorney she consulted about having me declared incompetent? Or the $43,000 in secret debt she's accumulated? Silence. What are you talking about? Ask her, Margaret. Ask her why she really wanted access to my finances. I hung up before she could respond. The phone rang again. Harold's sister, Patricia, with the same accusations, the same blind faith in Thalia's sob story. By noon, 6 relatives had called, all parroting Thalia's narrative. Poor Thalia, victim of a vindictive mother-in-law who'd lost her mind. I listened, said little, and noted who was quick to turn on me. The most disturbing call came from my nephew David, whom I'd helped through college. Aunt Eileen, he said, his voice professional, detached. The family's concerned you might be showing signs of dementia. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Who's discussing my cognitive state, David? Well, Talia mentioned some incidents, strange behavior, paranoid accusations. Do you remember who paid for your final year at Northwestern? I asked. Or your sister's wedding? Your mother's cancer treatment? The down payment on your house? Silence. So, when you talk about my cognitive decline, consider whether someone with dementia would remember those details so clearly. He hung up without a word. Talia hadn't just left quietly. She'd launched a campaign, painting herself as the victim and me as an unstable old woman. Her lies spread like poison, turning family against me. 2 days later, Darren called, his voice exhausted. Mom, can we meet? Talia's been calling everyone. The family's in an uproar. We met at a small cafe downtown. A neutral space for a painful conversation. Darren looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes red, clothes wrinkled. She's destroyed me, he said. She told my boss you're suffering from dementia, that I've been distracted at work. She suggested they reconsider my job performance. The cruelty took my breath away. Not content with ruining her own reputation, Talia was sabotaging Darren's career. What did your boss say? He was sympathetic, suggested I take time off for family medical issues. What could I tell him? That my wife tried to have my mother declared incompetent to steal her money? That I've been living in a house you own without knowing it? What else? I asked. She's living with her sister, crying to anyone who'll listen about how you manipulated our marriage, how you're dangerous. She's even seen a lawyer claiming tenant rights, saying you coerced her into leaving. Show me what she's saying, I said. He opened his phone, revealing Talia's social media posts, carefully crafted cries for sympathy. Going through a difficult time with family, sometimes the people you trust hurt you deepest. Learning hard truths about manipulation and abuse. Each post had dozens of comments, friends and strangers alike, condemning the unnamed family members who'd wronged her. She's good, I admitted. She's evil, Darren said. No, she's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? I leaned forward. Look at her posts. What's missing? He scrolled, frowning. I don't see it. She never mentions loving you, not once. She talks about betrayal, manipulation, but never about losing her marriage, missing her husband. The realization hit him hard. Because she doesn't, he whispered. Because she never did, Jolt. This isn't grief, sweetheart. It's rage at being caught. What do we do? He asked. We let her keep digging, I said. Confident people get careless. They overreach. And Talia's about to make a mistake that reveals everything. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. This is insurance, proof of every lie, every manipulation, every financial indiscretion she's committed. Why haven't you used it? Because I wanted to give her enough rope to hang herself, and judging by her behavior, she's about to tie the noose. Thalia's fatal mistake came a week later, in a phone call that would expose her true nature. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, and I was reviewing investment portfolios in my modest apartment when the phone rang. Mrs. Holloway, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Sacramento Police Department. My blood went cold. Yes, ma'am? I need to ask you about a report filed against you. Allegations of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I'm sorry, what? A young woman, Talia Holloway, claims you're a vulnerable elderly woman who's been financially abused by family members and that they're retaliating against her for trying to help. The audacity was staggering. Even for Talia, this was a bold move. Detective, there's been a misunderstanding. I'll be at the station within the hour. I called my attorney, Jonathan Reeves, who'd handled my affairs since Harold's death. Jonathan, meet me at the Sacramento Police Department. Thalia's accused Darren and me of elder abuse. That's a serious charge, Eileen, he said. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I changed into a tailored suit, gathered my documents, and drove to the station in the BMW I kept garaged across town. It was time to stop hiding. Detective Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, looked surprised when I walked in with Jonathan, both of us exuding the confidence of our true selves. Mrs. Holloway, she said, you're not what I expected based on the report. What did the report say? She consulted her notes. Thalia Holloway claims your son and his wife have been stealing from you, controlling your money, forcing you to live in substandard conditions. She says when she tried to intervene, your son became violent, and you've been turned against her through manipulation. And her evidence. Photos of your apartment, showing poor living conditions, and bank statements with low balances. I smiled grimly. May I ask when those photos were taken? Within the last month, she says. She claims she was documenting your welfare. So she was stalking me, I said. Martinez looked uncomfortable. She called it welfare checks. Jonathan leaned forward. Detective, has anyone verified her claims? We're investigating, she said. Good, I said, reaching into my purse. Because I have documents you'll want to see. I placed my real bank statements on the table, showing assets of $5 million. Martinez's eyes widened. Mrs. Holloway, these show significant wealth. Yes, I said. The statements Talia provided show my household account, deliberately kept low. I maintain multiple accounts. Jonathan added, my client is a wealthy widow who chose to live modestly. She's never been abused or controlled by her son. Then why would Talia make these accusations? Martinez asked. Because she's the one who attempted financial exploitation, I said, pulling out the envelope from the cafe. These show she contacted an elder law attorney to gain guardianship over me, specifically to access my assets. She's also accumulated $43,000 in secret debt, pressuring her husband to extract money from me. Martinez studied the documents, emails, phone records, Thalia's searches on elder abuse and conservatorship laws. Mrs. Holloway, if this is true, Thalia has filed a false police report. Yes, I said, a serious crime. What do you want to do? Jonathan answered, We want Thalia prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and a restraining order preventing her from contacting my client or her family. Martinez nodded. I'll consult the district attorney, but based on this, it appears Talia has committed several crimes. We'll arrest her. 2 hours later, I was in my real home, a luxury penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Sacramento. Darren called, his voice shaken. Mom, the police arrested Talia. I know, I said. How? And where are you? I went by your apartment. It's empty. I'm at home, sweetheart. My real home. The apartment was just a costume. Silence. Mom, I don't understand anything anymore. Come to the Meridian Towers, 5th Street, penthouse level. I'll explain. 30 minutes later, Darren stood in my living room, surrounded by antiques and artwork Harold and I had collected. This is where you've been living? Always, I said. Even when I visited you, I came home to this. He sank into a leather chair, head in his hands. She really tried to have you declared incompetent. Filed a false police report. Why go that far? Because she's not just greedy, Darren. She's malicious. When she couldn't get what she wanted, she tried to destroy us out of spite. What happens to her now? She'll be prosecuted for filing a false report, attempted fraud, possibly stalking. She'll likely serve jail time and have a criminal record. He was quiet, processing. I feel like I don't know my own life. You know the important things, I said. You know I love you. You know you're a good man who got caught up with a bad woman. You know you have a second chance. Do I? Do we? That depends, I said, looking at my son, the boy I'd almost lost. On whether you can forgive yourself for not seeing who she was, and whether you can forgive me for testing you. You were projecting yourself, he said, but it's not fair. A mother shouldn't have to test her child's love. No, I agreed. Can we start over? I'd like that, I said, my voice soft. No more tests. No more lies. But Darren, if you ever bring home another woman like Talia, I'm moving to Europe with no forwarding address. He laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in months. Deal. 6 months later, I was on my terrace, watching the sunset paint the city gold when Darren called. The divorce is final, he said, his voice lighter. I feel free, horrified, but free. Good, I said. And Talia? 6 months in jail, 3 years probation, restitution for legal costs, and a 2-year restraining order. Even better. He paused. Mom, when did you know she'd try something like this? The 2nd week after your father's funeral, I said. She visited, supposedly to check on me. 5 minutes on my grief, 45 on Harold's life insurance and investments. That's when I decided to test her. I thought she was grieving too, he said. No, sweetheart. She was calculating. But I didn't do this just to prove she was terrible. I did it to save you from a life with someone who'd have destroyed you. I have something to tell you, he said. I've been seeing someone. Rebecca, a teacher. She's kind, normal, doesn't know about our money. She thinks I'm just a guy with a regular job. I laughed. You told her you inherited my house? Well, technically, someday, right? What's she like? She volunteers at an animal shelter, drives a 10-year-old Honda, thinks Olive Garden is fancy. I think I could love her, but I'm scared of making the same mistake. I walked to the edge of my terrace, looking out over the city. Your father used to say love makes you feel like the best version of yourself, while manipulation makes you feel never good enough. How does Rebecca make you feel? Like I'm enough, just as I am. Then trust that. You're wiser now. I'd like you to meet her, he said. I'd love that. And this time, I'll be myself. No tests, no costumes. What if she doesn't like you? Then she's not right for you. And if I don't like her, I'll keep my opinions to myself unless you ask. Mom, thank you for saving me, even when I didn't know I needed it. As I hung up, I stayed on the terrace, the city lights twinkling below. I thought about the 3 years I'd spent in the shadows, testing those I loved, protecting myself from those who'd use me. It had cost me relationships, time, and emotional energy, but it had saved my son and taught me my own strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, apologizing for believing Thalia's lies. More followed. Patricia, David, cousins, all admitting they'd been too quick to judge. I responded with grace, but noted who had turned on me. Some bonds could be mended, but they'd never be the same. The final message came from Detective Martinez. Thalia had tried to contact me from jail, blocked by the restraining order. I wasn't surprised. She'd never accept defeat, but I was no longer worried. I'd reclaimed my power, my voice, my life. Tomorrow, I'd sell the house and give Darren the proceeds. A real inheritance. I'd plan my future, travel, philanthropy, or just the joy of living authentically. But tonight, I sat on my terrace, surrounded by the luxury I'd earned and the peace I'd fought for, knowing my son was free to build a life with someone who might truly love him. The phone rang one last time. Darren. Mom, I forgot to ask, what are you going to do with your life now? I looked out over the city, the possibilities endless. I'm going to live it, I said. Openly, honestly, without apology. I'm going to be exactly who I am. And who is that? A woman who survived a test of her own making and came out stronger. A mother who fought for her son. A widow who honored her husband's memory by protecting what we built. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. As I hung up, I stayed on the terrace, the city quiet below. For 3 years, I had lived a lie to uncover the truth. Now, I was ready to step into the light, not as the vulnerable widow, but as Elizabeth Holloway, a woman who'd faced betrayal and emerged victorious. What would you do in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to fight for your truth? Drop a comment below and let me know the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And check out 2 more channel favorites on the final screen. They'll surprise you. Thank you for joining me on this journey.